upsetting to very many people.
I just couldn't believe it. I cried for days.
To shoot someone 6 times shows the viciousness of this crime.
But beneath the gunshots lies another, more shocking level of violence.
There was a bite mark, but only the bottom teeth were the ones that were left an impression.
It was a crime of passion. The question is, whose passion?
As detectives step into this woman's life, they'll soon find themselves confronting a string of high-profile suspects, one more powerful and potentially dangerous than the next.
You're talking about a control freak who was a narcissist, a megalomaniac.
There was a bigger story here. It's definitely a shock.
Wednesday, November 26, 1997. It's the day before Thanksgiving in Akron, Ohio. At 10:25 a.m., Lori Collins, a medical assistant, steps out the back door of the building where she works for a cigarette break. In the parking lot, she notices a van belonging to her boss, 41-year-old Dr. Margot Prade.
She thought that was odd because they didn't know where Margot was.
Dr. Prade was supposed to arrive at the office about an hour or so earlier. The nurses and the office manager, they were waiting for her because there were so many patients waiting to see her.
Dr. Prade! Dr. Prade!
She saw Margot's body slumped over.
Oh my gosh!
And she saw blood.
Dr. Prade!
She didn't know whether she was alive or dead.
Lori Collins rushes back into the office to call 911. Within minutes, paramedics are at the scene, but there is little they can do for Margot Prade.
EMT she has multiple gunshot wounds. They pronounce her dead at the scene.
What do we got? No pulse.
This was a huge blow to the community. Margot was extremely well known and well loved.
The question becomes, obviously, you know, who did this? Who's responsible?
Unraveling this whodunit will be no small task, especially when those responsible are holding all the cards.
There's no gun, there's no bloody clothes. All the things you look for in a homicide, none are present.
Margot Schamberger was born on September 17, 1956 in Akron, Ohio. The youngest of 7 children, Margot began making her mark on the world at an early age.
She loved school when she was a little girl. She skipped the 5th grade because she was so bright.
Her scholastic ability was amazing. She just excelled in many different areas.
Margot attended Central Howard High School, where she blossomed into a beautiful and brilliant young woman.
Long, beautiful hair, always dressed very nice, very neat. Her smile was radiant. It just lit up the room.
Margot dated occasionally, but wasn't in a rush to find a man. Then, at a charity event her senior year, she met Douglas Prade, a handsome young Akron police officer.
She was very impressed with him. He's very nice, athletic, strong figure, nice looking and well-spoken. She was smitten.
My name is Doug.
Margot.
Like Margot, Douglas also grew up in Akron, though he'd left Ohio for a brief period of time after college to serve in the Navy.
He had entered the military when he was young. He was discharged with a medical disorder.
Douglas was 28 years old, 10 years older than Margot, which is a pretty big difference at that age, but they were determined to take it slowly and just see where the relationship went.
Margot graduated high school in 1974, valedictorian of her class, but her dreams for the future were just beginning.
She always wanted to be a doctor, a family practitioner. She wanted to be able to service all ages.
Margot enrolled at Kent State University and took part in a dual program that allowed her to work towards both her bachelor's and medical degrees simultaneously.
It just goes to show you, if you're motivated, what you can do.
Throughout college, Margot continued to date Douglas Prade, whose career was also on the fast track.
He rose steadily through the ranks from patrol to a sergeant in the patrol unit.
In 1979, after Margot graduated med school, she and Douglas married. Soon, 2 daughters, Kenya and Sahara, made their family complete.
She was just so excited to be a mother and have girls. She wanted them to have the best of everything.
Determined to ensure their daughters wanted for nothing, both Margot and Douglas continued climbing their respective career ladders.
Douglas Praed was a commander in the patrol division. He was thought to be next in line to become the next Akron police chief.
Within a few years, Margot completed her residency and opened her own practice in downtown Akron.
You must be Catherine.
Yes.
Hey, Catherine. So how are you feeling today?
Her practice was thriving. She was very well known and popular. Everyone wanted to have Dr. Praed as their doctor.
Unfortunately, the couple's professional success came with a personal price. The long hours Margot and Douglas both spent on the job left them little time for each other, and eventually they began to drift apart.
They spent so much time away from each other, they were going in different directions. At a certain point, Margot filed for the divorce.
And in April of 1997, the divorce was finalized, with Margot and Doug agreeing to share custody of their 2 daughters. Now 40 and suddenly a single mom, Margot found dating to be a daunting task.
She said, I went out on a blind date the other night. I said, girl, do black people even know how to do blind dates? We don't know how to do blind dates, you know? And she started laughing.
Then in June 1997, a friend introduced Margot to Thomas Houston, an attorney from Columbus, Ohio.
Thomas Houston was a very well-educated attorney who worked for a prestigious law firm.
Thomas was it. So successful, really, really nice.
Margot and Thomas made such an intense connection that within a matter of months, they began talking marriage.
What do you think about it?
I love the idea of being Mrs. Houston.
Margot fell in love, and so did Thomas Houston. He just said it was an incredible connection.
She was planning on getting engaged and moving out of town, maybe to Cincinnati. She was just so happy.
Which makes the scene in the parking lot of Margot Praed's medical practice the morning of November 26th all the more horrific.
It was shocking that a prominent doctor in our area was found shot in a parking lot of her own practice.
Margot was a superstar, and she was not just a superstar in the community, she was a superstar within her family. So who would want Margot Praed dead?
As investigators begin combing through the crime scene, they quickly realize that answering that question will be no simple task.
The crime scene just simply didn't make any sense, and the crime itself was so unfathomable that detectives didn't even know where to start looking for answers.
Shortly after 10:30 a.m. on November 26, 1997, police in Akron, Ohio converged on a medical building parking lot where 41-year-old physician Dr. Margot Praed was found dead in the front seat of her minivan. Now, one of the first questions on investigators' minds is how long has Margot been here?
Like most mornings, Margot had gone to do her rounds first. She had gone to the hospital, checked on all of her patients, and then gone to the office. They think she left the hospital about 8:45 or so.
The nurses and her office manager were waiting for Margot to come in as the patients are kind of lining up. And it's 9:15, it's 9:30, it's 9:45, it's 10 o'clock, and they can't reach her.
Her body was found at 10:30 a.m. Had she arrived at 9 a.m., her normal time, is that when she was killed? And if so, why had nobody noticed her body before that?
Detectives considered different motives for the murder.
The most obvious initial concern would be that it was like an attempted carjacking or a robbery because it was in a parking lot.
As they search the car, CSIs discover a diamond tennis bracelet on the passenger seat floor, one they presume belonged to Margot.
Hey, look at this.
One theory was that someone walked up to rob her. Maybe they struggled a little bit over the tennis bracelet, and then this person shot her.
The condition of Margot's clothing seems to support this theory.
She had on her lab coat. It was completely saturated with blood. Buttons on her lab coat were ripped off. We knew there was a struggle in the van with her attacker.
But as police continue searching Margot's van, they begin to wonder if this well-to-do doctor had really been the victim of a crime of opportunity.
They found her purse in the back seat of the car undisturbed with, money and credit cards in it. So they became concerned that this appeared to be an intentional murder.
As CSIs continue processing the scene, patrol officers radio Margot's ex-husband, Captain Douglas Prade, and inform him that there's been an incident outside her practice.
Most of them didn't know that they were divorced. This was not common knowledge, even though it had happened 6 months earlier.
When Douglas Prade arrived on scene, he was falling to the ground and holding his face and appearing very distraught.
Though it pains them to see their beloved captain doubled over with grief. Once Douglas Prade gains his composure, investigators know they have a job to do.
Captain, I hate to do this, but I gotta ask you some questions.
That's okay, I understand.
A woman is killed. Who is the first suspect? The husband. But in this case, the husband is a high-ranking police official and the detective's commanding officer. So this makes for a pretty awkward situation.
Can you tell me where you were this morning?
I was at the gym working out.
What time was this?
9:30.
He was very physically fit. He did work out regularly. It was his normal routine.
Where is this gym?
Over by my apartment. Off Washington, about 4 miles away.
Is there anyone that was there that may have saw you?
There was this woman. I don't know her name, but I've seen her there before.
Of course, detectives know that they're gonna have to confirm the captain's alibi.
Captain, we should do a gunshot residue test.
Absolutely. I mean, that's procedure.
A gunshot residue test is a test that is supposed to let you know if someone has recently fired a handgun. It's not 100% reliable, but it's a pretty good indicator.
We have your hand.
A gun residue test was performed on Douglas Prade and was negative.
Can you think of anyone who would want to kill Dr. Prade?
I don't know if you guys know this, but we recently got a divorce.
I didn't. Sorry.
I mean, it was totally amicable. But she did start dating somebody. I think his name is Thomas Houston. I think you need to check him out.
Yes, sir.
I need y'all to find out who did this. Y'all can have any resources y'all need.
Sir.
It really became a hunt for who had the motive to kill Margot. Who would want Margot dead?
And within a matter of hours, investigators would uncover evidence that would have everyone scratching their heads.
Pathologists have seen all kinds of crazy things. I would say they probably have never seen one quite like this.
Workplace homicide has been declared by the CDC as a serious public health epidemic. According to a study by the Bureau of Justice, each year nearly 1 million Americans are victims of violent workplace crimes. In fact, workplace homicides are the fastest growing category of murder in the United States, having tripled in the last decade. Detectives in Akron, Ohio are investigating the shooting death of 41-year-old Margot Prade, a prominent and extremely popular family physician.
She just had a huge practice, over 7,000 patients, which is unbelievable for a city this size.
Whether she was helping people with their terminal illnesses or whether she was helping people with their physicals and pee-wee football, she was there for them.
News of Margot's death spreads quickly throughout the city.
I had gotten a phone call from a family friend. I was devastated. My whole body just collapsed.
Margot's body is taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy.
She had been shot 6 times.
This shows the viciousness of this crime.
The speculation was that the gun used was a .38 caliber revolver because there were no casings found at the scene.
As the autopsy continues, the medical examiner notices an unusual mark on Margot's upper left arm.
What is it?
That's a bite mark.
This was only half of a bite mark, only the bottom teeth were the ones that were left an impression.
How do you have half a bite mark?
I don't know. I've never seen anything like this before.
The medical examiner also finds signs of the bite mark on Margot's clothing.
There was a slight impression of it on the lab coat, but her lab coat was soaked in blood.
For those present, Margot's injuries seem telling.
The 6 gunshot wounds and the bite mark are indicative that this is a very personal attack, that this is someone Margot Praed knew and someone who was angry at her.
Given the seemingly personal nature of the crime, could Margot's ex-husband Douglas Praed be involved? At the scene, Douglas appeared genuinely overcome with grief and had willingly submitted to a gunshot residue test. But investigators had yet to confirm his alibi.
Douglas told detectives that he was in the gym working out when Margot was shot, and he also said there was one other person in there with him.
With no surveillance cameras at the gym, investigators checked the sign-in sheet from the morning of the murder. Not only is Captain Praed's name on the list, so is that of another individual, a woman named Kathy Lynch. Within the hour, detectives have located her and brought her in for an interview.
Coming in.
Hi.
Can we ask you a few questions?
Sure.
Do you remember where you were last Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving in the morning?
I was at the gym.
Miss Lynch would normally go to the gym 5 or 6 days a week and would arrive between 8:30 and 9:30 in the morning.
Do you remember what time you arrived that morning?
I can't be certain for that day.
Was there anyone else there?
There was a man. He was tall, very well built, bald-headed.
Is anybody using this?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
So how you doing today?
I'm good, thanks.
Is this the man that you saw that morning at the gym?
That's him. I'm positive.
Kathy Lynch's statement seems to corroborate Captain Praed's alibi, with speculation swirling through Akron that the aspiring police chief might be involved in his ex-wife's murder. Investigators issue a public statement clearing him of any wrongdoing.
He moved back into the home with the daughters. He had custody of the daughters and basically took over the life there.
With Dr. Praed's ex-husband scratched off the suspect list, investigators turn their attention to her new boyfriend, Thomas Houston.
He lived in Columbus. He was in Columbus at the time.
Thomas was the closest man in Margot's life at this point, so maybe there's something going on in the relationship that no one knew about.
Thomas agrees to drive up to Akron for an interview with detectives.
Mr. Houston, I know this is a difficult time, but we have a few questions for you.
I understand.
Houston is completely cooperative with the police. He tells them everything about how he and Margot met and about their relationship, and he seemed genuinely upset about her death.
Are there any problems in your relationship?
We were honestly doing better than ever. We were in love.
He just said they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. The plan was that they were going to be together at Thanksgiving, and they were going to tell everyone that they wanted to get engaged. And then she was murdered the day before that could happen.
Where were you Wednesday morning?
I was at my home in Columbus.
You didn't work that day?
No. I took off to do some personal errands.
He said that he had some things to do before driving up to Akron that afternoon. He was going to help Margot with the Thanksgiving meal and stay over that night.
That's when I got the call. And I heard she was dead.
Was there anyone with you that morning? Anyone who can verify your whereabouts?
No.
Although Thomas doesn't have anyone who can immediately verify his statement, the 130-mile distance between Columbus and Akron makes him an unlikely suspect.
Columbus is about a 2-hour drive from Akron, and while he can't prove that he was there the entire morning, there was nothing to make detectives suspicious about him.
Okay, thanks for your help. We'll be in touch if we have any more questions.
Desperate for a more substantial lead, detectives hold a press conference, asking the public to come forward with any information they may have regarding the murder. The request immediately pays off.
Detective, you might want to come read this.
Investigators receive a letter with no return address and no signature. But the author of this letter says they have information about who killed Margot.
In fact, the author even identifies the killer by name. Denise Evans, a friend of Margot's.
Police have no idea who the tipster is, but they now have a name, and they know that they need to find out everything they can about Denise Evans.
Police in Akron, Ohio have been investigating the murder of popular family physician Margot Praed for nearly a week with little success. Then, after making a public plea for information, they receive an anonymous letter claiming that Denise Evans, a friend of Margot's, was responsible for her death.
There was some thought that there was some hard feelings between her and Margot. Maybe there was some jealousy or envy of her relationship with Thomas Houston.
Detectives locate Denise and interview her and her husband James about the allegations.
We appreciate your cooperation.
Oh, certainly.
How long have you known Margot?
For close to about 10 years now.
We used to socialize with both of them, her and Douglas, before the divorce.
Denise explains that after the divorce, she and Margot remained friends, and that she was the one who introduced Margot to Thomas Houston.
She set Margot up with the blind date with Thomas.
Were you jealous of Margot's relationship with Thomas?
What?
That's crazy. Why would you say something like that?
The detective puts all his cards on the table and he tells them about the contents of this anonymous letter.
This is outrageous. I can't even imagine who would say something like that.
So it's not true? No, absolutely not.
Denise and James Evans deny the allegations in the letter. They also are able to provide solid alibis as to where they were the morning of the murder. So the police end the interview.
Well, thank you for your time speaking with us. We'll be in touch.
Thanks.
The investigation is back at square one. Meanwhile, Dr. Margot's family lays her to rest in a ceremony that draws citywide attention.
It was huge. A line was wrapped around the church. People were devastated, sobbing.
But two individuals felt the weight of this tragedy in a way that no one else could. Margot's daughters, 12-year-old Kenya and 8-year-old Sahara.
Kenya and Sahara was so young, and everyone was there for Kenya and Sahara. We supported those girls wholeheartedly.
With each passing day, the frustration builds for investigators as they search desperately for any clue that might lead to the killer. Then they finally get a break. They learn a car dealership next to Margot's office has surveillance cameras which point in the direction of the parking lot.
Today, of course, most businesses have surveillance cameras, but back in 1997, that was not the case.
But the video's quality is a far cry from today's high-def standards.
It wasn't digital technology. We even sent this video to NASA, trying to get it as clear as humanly possible.
One thing police get is a timeline of the shooting. The enhanced video shows Margot's van arriving at her office at 9:09 a.m.
The officers also discover that there had been a white car waiting there for at least 10 minutes, and then you could see a very shadowy figure get out of that white car, walk over to the minivan, and get in the passenger door. And about 90 seconds transpired, and then they opened the door. A few more seconds transpired, and then that person went back to the white car and left.
There's no doubt in detectives' minds that this person is the killer. But the poor quality of the footage poses another problem.
The image was so grainy, they couldn't even tell whether it was a man or a woman.
The owner of the car dealership has other key information.
So you knew Dr. Praed, is that correct?
Oh yeah, I knew Dr. Praed. In fact, I spoke with her that morning.
You did? About what?
Well, she was buying a new car from us, an SUV. It was on order, so she was calling to see when it might be coming in.
Aside from this new SUV, the dealer had also sold Margot the van she was driving on the day of the murder. He informs detectives of a unique safety feature it included.
When you got it up over 15 miles an hour, all the doors automatically locked. And they stay locked even when you stop.
So when she pulled into the lot, all the doors were locked?
Yeah.
So in order for someone to get into the car, they either had to have a key, or Margot would have had to have unlocked the door.
This confirms what police already suspected. Margot's killer was someone she knew. The two men closest to the doctor were her ex-husband, Police Captain Douglas Praed, and her new boyfriend, Thomas Houston. Now detectives wonder if they had been too quick to dismiss them as suspects.
It was known by friends and family that Doug Prade had a key to the van that Margot was driving.
Thomas could have had a key to the van, but even if he didn't, Margot would have let him in.
And although longtime friend Denise Evans seems to have an airtight alibi, the information about the vehicle's locking mechanism now prohibits detectives from ruling her out. But before inquiries can be reopened into these three potential suspects, a surprise witness comes forward with game-changing information about the morning of the murder.
He was there that morning. He saw the white car driving away, and he could identify who was driving it.
Detectives in Akron, Ohio believe the individual responsible for the murder of Dr. Margot Prade was someone close to her. And while surveillance footage of the crime scene can't specifically ID the killer, investigators have one other key piece of evidence that might: the bite mark on Margot's arm.
Now, a bite mark is not as conclusive as, let's say, a fingerprint is, but it can be compared to a suspect's teeth to either include them or exclude them.
And so we decided, let's start getting exemplars and let's start seeing if we can't exclude some of these other suspects that have been thrown out here.
Investigators obtained dental impressions from numerous people, including ex-husband Douglas Prade, boyfriend Thomas Houston, and Margot's friend Denise Evans. As comparisons are being conducted by a forensic dentist, investigators use the surveillance video to cross-reference the alibis of their three potential suspects. They start with police captain Doug Prade.
When they had initially looked at Doug Prade, they believed that the murder had happened somewhere between 9:30 to 10:15. But now they know that the murder happened somewhere around 9:10 or 9:12. This is a completely different story.
Doug Prade had told detectives he was working out between 9:30 and 10:30, and a witness was able to verify that.
But Doug Prade's apartment was only a 6-minute drive away from Margot's office, so he could have been in that parking lot at 9:12 and then to the gym by 9:30.
When police questioned Doug the morning of the murder, they tested his hands for gunshot residue. The initial results were negative, but when investigators dig deeper into the report, they uncover an important error.
It was a new gunshot residue kit, and the person that did the test forgot to remove the tape, and so they swabbed his hands, and they didn't get any sample.
Investigators also dig deeper into Doug and Margot's divorce, and soon discover it was anything but amicable.
Initially, Margot's friends and family did not want to come forward and say anything negative about Doug. After all, he's a police captain. But eventually, slowly, they started coming forward and saying how volatile the relationship had become.
There were a whole host of issues going on with Margot and Doug's marriage. Doug had had multiple affairs and in fact had fathered a child by another woman.
Friends and family say Margot was willing to look the other way, at least for a while.
Where have you been?
I didn't think you would still be up.
Well, I'm surprised you thought about me at all those little girlfriends you've been running around with.
Come on, don't do this right now.
I'm sick of being your doormat. Think you can walk all over me.
Margot's friends say that eventually she became fed up with Doug's serial infidelity and filed for divorce. As for Doug, he wasn't so much okay with the divorce as he was in denial.
Doug wouldn't even hire a lawyer, wouldn't sign the papers. It became an uncontested divorce because he wouldn't get involved in any way.
And when the presiding judge awarded Margot the family home, Doug refused to acknowledge that decision as well.
He had keys to the house, so he would just let himself in.
Ultimately, Margot had to obtain a court order to have Doug removed from the home.
Margot's finally free to start dating other men. This incensed Doug even more.
When she would be out, he would question the babysitter and later the children on where she had been and who she was with.
When Margot starts dating Thomas Houston, that really sets Doug off. Not only is he a professional, a well-to-do attorney, he also doesn't live in Akron. He lives in Columbus, which means that Doug has no control over him.
He couldn't let go. I remember one time I was over at her house, and he came in. Me and Margot was there.
Margot! We gotta talk about this right now! Who is this guy Thomas you've been seeing?
None of your business.
Who is Thomas?
Get out of here right now.
And I never saw rage like that. Scaring rage. Frightful rage. I'm talking about fear.
We gonna talk about this, Margot!
Now at her wit's end, in November of 1997, Margot called her attorney to discuss further legal action against her ex-husband.
Doug came over unannounced again.
She wants to go back to court to have Doug's joint custody revoked. This will mean he couldn't see his daughters whenever he wanted.
And while Margot Praed was moving on and starting a new life, his life was somewhat unraveling. He was in financial trouble. He had a lot of debt, and she was going after him for more child support.
But apparently, Margot also took issue with something Doug did just prior to her death.
She complained about Doug having keys to her van. He used it anytime he wanted to without her permission.
Detectives have to wonder, did Doug use his key that morning to enter Margot's van and kill her?
The problem is that this is all very circumstantial. Douglas Praed appears to have a motive. He's very jealous of the relationship that Margot has. He also is having financial difficulties, but this is not enough for an arrest.
The investigation grinds on. Then almost 3 months after the shooting, a man named Howard Brooks comes forward with a shocking revelation.
Thanks for coming in.
All right, thank you, sir.
So, tell us what you know.
His name was Howard Brooks, and he was a patient of Margot's. And he had just been there that morning.
And after the appointment, you know, I was outside waiting on my ride to come. And I saw this white car just peel out the parking lot.
At the time, Brooks didn't think it was a big deal. But later on, people he talked to thought he should go to the police.
So did you get a good look at the driver?
Yes, absolutely.
Would you recognize him if you saw him again?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, sure.
The detectives show him a photo lineup, which includes a photo of Douglas Praed.
That's him. That's him right there.
You're sure?
Positive.
Howard was very adamant that Doug Praed was the driver of the car. He also felt that perhaps there might have been someone else in the car with him. He wasn't sure.
Detectives now believe they have enough evidence to arrest Douglas Praed for his ex-wife's murder. But there are still nagging questions.
Howard Brooks' statement places Doug Praed at the scene, but it does not prove that he was the shooter. What about the other person in the car? Could they have been the shooter or an accomplice?
Margot motivated everybody, man. Personally, I didn't realize the phenomenon that lived around me until later on. And I would step back and look and say, wow, look at what she accomplished. But then she would come to me and say, you can accomplish the same things. All you have to do is take the proper steps.
A witness named Howard Brooks has identified Margot Praed's ex-husband Douglas as the man he saw speed away from her office on the morning of November 26, 1997. While detectives think Douglas shot his ex-wife out of jealousy, they have questions about the second person Howard places inside the getaway car.
Could this other person in the car be the actual shooter? Could Doug Praed have just been the getaway driver?
As investigators ponder these questions, comparisons on the bite mark impressions on Margot's upper left arm are completed.
That was the lab. The mold they made of Doug's mouth, it matches Margot.
You have to remember, this was only half of a bite mark, but only the bottom teeth were the ones that were left an impression. Doug had an upper partial denture, so his entire upper mouth was a denture that was removable.
When the mold of Doug's lower teeth was compared to the bite mark on Margot's arm, it's a match. And it's enough to convince detectives that Doug must be the shooter.
Looks like he's our guy.
The bite mark had to have taken place during the assault. Doug got into the car, he struggled with Margot over the gun, and he bit her.
On February 23, 1998, Akron police arrest one of their own, Captain Douglas Praed, and charge him with the murder of his ex-wife.
When he got arrested, everybody was elated.
The arrest of a high-ranking police official for murder is front-page news all over the state.
Akron police captain kills his ex-wife, who's a prominent doctor. It's unprecedented. One of Akron's most notorious murder cases.
As prosecutors prepare for trial, investigators uncover even more damning evidence against Douglas.
It was a bank deposit from 6 weeks prior to the homicide. On the back side of it, he had handwritten out numerous bills that he had, and then they were totaled up. And then that total amount was subtracted from the sum of $75,000.
Now, $75,000 is significant because that is the amount of money that Douglas had to gain if Margot had died prior to February of 1998, in which time her life insurance policy would expire. Douglas Prade was the only beneficiary of that life insurance.
On September 1st, 1998, in a Summit County courtroom, the state of Ohio versus Douglas Prade gets underway. Armed with their new cache of evidence, prosecutors open their case by painting a picture of a jealous and controlling ex-husband who would rather kill his ex-wife than see her with another man.
You have an ugly divorce. You have Doug Prade exhibiting controlling and abusive behavior. Margot Prade had told friends and family she was in fear for her life.
He knew she was planning to marry Thomas Houston. He knew she was going to court to try to take away custody, to try to increase child support, and he wasn't going to stand for it.
Prosecutors argue that on the morning of the murder, Captain Prade drove to his ex-wife's office, arriving just before 9. Prade waited in the parking lot for Margot's van to arrive.
She pulled in a little after 9. He walks over to the van, probably unlocked the passenger side door with his key.
Margot, open up the door.
Douglas, what are you doing here?
Let me in. I want to talk to you.
No, I'm not letting you in. There's nothing to talk about.
No,
there's nothing to talk about. Douglas, what are you doing?
He gets inside. They argue.
Please get out of my car.
Wow, we need to talk about this.
There's nothing to talk about.
He pulls a gun on her.
We're gonna be together.
He points a gun at her, and she didn't just sit there and take it. She fought him. I don't think he was expecting that. And so he ended up doing something that was not planned by biting her.
He emptied the gun into her. Then he went back into his car and he left. And as he was passing Margot's building, he was seen by Howard Brooks, who was standing outside waiting for his ride.
Doug drives back to his apartment complex and rushes down to the gym, trying to establish an alibi.
I don't think he counted on the fact that we were going to be able to pinpoint the exact moment of the homicide.
But Doug's defense attorneys argue that the prosecution's case is purely circumstantial and that there is no direct evidence linking him to the crime.
No weapon was ever found, no clothing worn at the time of the shooting was found, no car was ever found.
The defense also attacks the testimony of Howard Brooks and his identification of Doug as the driver of the white car.
He did not come forward until a couple of months after the crime. Police showed a number of photo lineups that were suggestive, some people say.
To cement their case, the defense makes a bold decision and calls Captain Doug Prade himself to the stand.
Douglas Prade asserted that the divorce was amicable and that he was staying in her home at her request.
When he testified, I wouldn't say he did a bad job of testifying, but he painted a pretty rosy picture of their relationship.
Prosecutors counter by pointing to the bite mark found on Margot's body, which they claim is proof Doug was the one who murdered her.
We had photographs of Doug's teeth, the bottom half, and we had photographs of Margot's arm. And we literally slid one right over the other for the jury with the expert there to say, see, which they could see. It's a match.
On September 23rd, 1998, after 3 weeks of back-and-forth testimony, both sides rest and the jury begins deliberations.
I really was emotionally invested in this case. I highly identified with Margot Braid. She was just such a remarkable person. I just felt very strongly that her death deserved justice.
After just 4 hours behind closed doors, the jury returns with a verdict.
Douglas E. Braid, guilty of the offense.
He was found guilty of aggravated murder.
We were relieved because Margot had some justice. And it wasn't just us, it was for her. It was for the community. It was for all the good cops that are out there.
Even as Judge Mary Spicer sentences Douglas Braid to life in prison, the former police captain remains defiant.
I absolutely did not kill Margot. I stand here in front of you talking to you like this is a convicted person. I'm an innocent convicted person.
He stood up in court and he says, "You are sending an innocent man to prison."
He just keeps saying he's innocent. That's sick and twisted. You pulled the trigger.
Although nothing can bring Margot Braid back, her memory lives on in friends, family, and the city who loved her.
I want my aunt to remember for being one of the best doctors in this city. She had a great work ethic. She was nurturing to her patients. She was an angel. I know she's smiling down on us. I know I'm the mother today because of who she was to me.
She and Douglas married. Soon, 2 daughters, Kenya and Sahara, made their family complete.
She was just so excited to be a mother and have girls. She wanted them to have the best of everything.
Determined to ensure their daughters wanted for nothing, both Margot and Douglas continued climbing their respective career ladders.
Douglas Braid was a commander in the patrol division. He was thought to be next in line to become the next Akron police chief.
Within a few years, Margot completed her residency and opened her own practice in downtown Akron.
You must be Catherine.
Yes.
Hey, Catherine. So how are you feeling today?
Her practice was thriving. She was very well known and popular. Everyone wanted to have Dr. Braid as their doctor.
Unfortunately, the couple's professional success came with a personal price. The long hours Margot and Douglas both spent on the job left them little time for each other, and eventually they began to drift apart.
They spent so much time away from each other, they were going in different directions. At a certain point, Margot filed for the divorce.
And especially when those responsible are holding all the cards.
There's no gun, there's no bloody clothes. All the things you look for in a homicide, none are present.
Margot Schamberger was born on September 17, 1956 in Akron, Ohio. The youngest of 7 children, Margot began making her mark on the world at an early age.
She loved school when she was a little girl. She skipped the 5th grade because she was so bright.
Her scholastic ability was amazing. She just excelled in many different areas.
Margot attended Central Howard High School, where she blossomed into a beautiful and brilliant young woman.
Long, beautiful hair, always dressed very nice, very neat. Her smile was radiant. It just lit up the room.
Margot dated occasionally, but wasn't in a rush to find a man. Then, at a charity event her senior year, she met Douglas Braid, a handsome young Akron police officer.
She was very impressed with him. He's very nice, athletic, strong figure, nice looking and well-spoken. She was smitten.
Lori Collins, a medical assistant, steps out the back door of the building where she works for a cigarette break. In the parking lot, she notices a van belonging to her boss, 41-year-old Dr. Margot Braid.
She thought that was odd because they didn't know where Margot was.
Dr. Braid was supposed to arrive at the office about an hour or so earlier. The nurses and the office manager, they were waiting for her because there were so many patients waiting to see her.
Dr. Braid! Dr. Braid!
She saw Margot's body slumped over.
Oh my gosh!
And she saw blood.
Dr. Braid!
She didn't know whether she was alive or dead.
Lori Collins rushes back into the office to call 911. Within minutes, paramedics are at the scene, but there is little they can do for Margot Braid.
EMT she has multiple gunshot wounds. They pronounce her dead at the scene.
What do we got?
No pulse.
This was a huge blow to the community. Margot was extremely well known and well loved.
The question becomes, obviously, who did this? Who's responsible?
Unraveling this whodunit will be no small task.
My name is Doug.
Margot.
Like Margot, Douglas also grew up in Akron, though he'd left Ohio for a brief period of time after college to serve in the Navy.
He had entered the military when he was young. He was discharged with a medical disorder.
Douglas was 28 years old, 10 years older than Margot, which is a pretty big difference at that age. But they were determined to take it slowly and just see where the relationship went.
Margot graduated high school in 1974, valedictorian of her class. But her dreams for the future were just beginning.
She always wanted to be a doctor, a family practitioner. She wanted to be able to service all ages.
Margot enrolled at Kent State University and took part in a dual program that allowed her to work towards both her bachelor's and medical degrees simultaneously.
It just goes to show you, if you're motivated, what you can do.
Throughout college, Margot continued to date Douglas Prade, whose career was also on the fast track.
He rose steadily through the ranks from patrol to a sergeant in the patrol unit.
In 1979, after Margot graduated med school,
Upsetting to very many people.
I just couldn't believe it. I cried for days.
To shoot someone 6 times shows the viciousness of this crime.
But beneath the gunshots lies another, more shocking level of violence.
There was a bite mark, but only the bottom teeth were the ones that were left an impression.
It was a crime of passion. The question is, whose passion?
As detectives step into this woman's life, they'll soon find themselves confronting a string of high-profile suspects, one more powerful and potentially dangerous than the next.
You're talking about a control freak who was a narcissist, a megalomaniac.
There was a bigger story here. It's definitely a shock.
Wednesday, November 26, 1997. It's the day before Thanksgiving in Akron, Ohio. At 10:25 a.m.,